It begins like so many viral moments do, quick, sharp, and almost harmless on the surface. A single comment from 50 Cent drops online. It carries his signature tone, sarcastic, cutting, perfectly timed. At first glance, it feels like just another joke, the kind he's built an entire online persona around. But within seconds, the mood shifts. Because this time, the name attached to the joke isn't random, it's T.I. And just like that, what should have been a fleeting moment of humor begins to feel something else entirely. The internet doesn't pause to ask questions anymore. It reacts. Screenshots of the comment spread like wildfire across platforms. Reaction pages repost it with dramatic captions. Fans rush into comment sections, choosing sides before they even fully understand what's being discussed. Within minutes, a single remark transforms into a full-scale digital event. But what makes this moment different isn't just the joke, it's the context surrounding it. Because the conversation quickly becomes tangled in rumors involving family and financial struggles, topics that are far more sensitive than a typical celebrity jab. Suddenly, people aren't laughing the same way. They're analyzing, speculating, interpreting every word as if it carries hidden meaning. And that's where the line between humor and humiliation starts to blur. The reason this situation escalates so quickly has less to do with the comment itself and more to do with history. This isn't two strangers colliding online. This is two high-profile figures who have existed in the same cultural space for years. Two personalities known for speaking their minds, commanding attention, and navigating controversy in very different ways. 50 Cent, in particular, has built a reputation that goes far beyond music. Over time, he has mastered the art of turning controversy into content. He doesn't just participate in viral moments, he creates them. His humor isn't random, it's strategic. He often chooses moments when someone is already trending, already under pressure, or already part of an ongoing conversation. Then he steps in with a comment that amplifies everything. And the internet, almost predictably, does the rest. On the other side is T.I., an artist whose public image has always included more than just music. He has positioned himself as a father, a businessman, and someone navigating the balance between fame and family life. That openness has earned him respect, but it also comes with a cost. When personal topics become part of your public identity, they're easier for the internet to grab onto and reshape. So when 50 Cent's comment appears, it doesn't exist in isolation. It connects, fairly or unfairly, to years of interviews, public moments, and narratives that fans have already built in their minds. And that's where things start to spiral. Within hours, the tone of the conversation begins to change. What started as a sarcastic remark is reposted with captions that suggest something deeper. Words like exposed, confirmed, and insider information begin appearing alongside the original joke. None of it is verified. None of it is backed by credible sources. But in the world of viral content, perception often moves faster than truth. Fans of T.I. quickly push back. They argue that the situation is being exaggerated beyond recognition, that a joke is being turned into a full-blown narrative without any real evidence. They point out how often celebrities become targets of online humor and how easily social media twists those moments into something more dramatic. Meanwhile, supporters of 50 Cent see it differently. To them, this is exactly what he does. This is his brand. He makes bold, sometimes outrageous comments, watches the reaction unfold, and lets the internet amplify it. From their perspective, the chaos isn't a problem, it's the point. And neither side is willing to step back. Then comes the first major shift, the moment that pushes the situation into a completely different territory. An old clip of T.I. resurfaces online. It's an interview where he talks about family responsibilities and financial pressures. On its own, the clip is harmless, even relatable. But in the context of the current situation, it's edited and reposted with dramatic captions that suggest it's directly connected to the rumor. For viewers who don't know the original context, It feels like evidence. And that changes everything. Now, the conversation isn't just about a joke anymore. It's about patterns. People begin connecting dots that may not actually be connected. Comments start appearing across social media. This explains everything. It all makes sense now. He wasn't joking, he was hinting. This is how misinformation evolves, not through completely false statements, but through the reinterpretation of unrelated truths. A real clip, taken out of context, becomes part of a new narrative. At the same time, 50 Cent continues doing what he's known for, leaning into the attention. Additional posts, indirect reactions, subtle comments. Nothing explicitly confirms anything, but each new piece of content keeps the conversation alive. Each post resets the cycle, pulling more people into the debate. And the algorithm rewards it. Soon, other voices begin to enter the conversation, not necessarily to confirm or deny the rumor, but to comment on the phenomenon itself. Some call it entertainment culture, a reflection of how modern audiences engage with celebrities. Others call it dangerous, pointing out how quickly jokes can turn into reputational damage. But regardless of the interpretation, one thing is clear: everyone is watching. As the situation grows, it becomes less about the original comment and more about the reaction to it. Social media users dig through old interviews, past moments, and archived content, trying to build a larger story. Even details that have no direct connection to the situation are pulled in and reinterpreted. And then comes another twist. A viral thread begins circulating, claiming that the entire situation stems from a misunderstanding involving private conversations. The thread provides no evidence, no sources, no verification, but the phrasing is enough to capture attention. Now the audience isn't just reacting, they're theorizing. And once theory takes over, facts become optional. At this stage, the situation reaches a point where truth is no longer the driving force behind the conversation. Engagement is, emotion is, interpretation is. The speed of the story matters more than its accuracy. Silence becomes part of the narrative too. T.I.'s lack of direct response is interpreted in multiple ways. Some see it as restraint, a decision not to fuel unnecessary drama. Others see it as avoidance, allowing rumors to grow unchecked. In viral culture, even doing nothing becomes something people analyze. And that's the trap. Responding risks amplifying the situation. Ignoring it risks letting it spiral further. Either way, the outcome is unpredictable. Meanwhile, the audience continues to reshape the story in real time. Memes multiply. Reaction videos flood platforms. Commentary channels break down every angle, often adding their own interpretations in the process. What started as a single moment has now become a layered narrative involving humor, ego, reputation, and speculation. At some point, the original joke almost disappears. In its place is something much bigger, a full-scale internet debate. People are no longer asking what was said. They're asking what it meant. Was it just trolling? Was it intentional? Was it personal? Was it strategic? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, does it even matter anymore? Because by this stage, the situation has taken on a life of its own. This is the reality of modern viral culture. A single comment can ignite a chain reaction that no one fully controls. The combination of high-profile personalities, existing narratives, and audience participation creates an environment where anything can escalate. In the end, the situation between 50 Cent and T.I. becomes less about conflict and more about perception. It highlights how quickly the internet can transform humor into controversy, how easily context can be lost, and how powerful collective interpretation can be. It also reveals something deeper about the audience itself. People aren't just consuming content anymore, they're shaping it. Every repost, every comment, every reaction adds another layer to the story. And once enough layers are added, separating fact from fiction becomes nearly impossible. So what started as a joke doesn't just land like a public execution. It evolves into something far more complex. A case study in how narratives are built. A reminder of how fragile context can be. And a clear example of how, in the digital age, the line between entertainment and reality is thinner than ever. What made the situation explode even further wasn't anything new being said. It was the way people started interpreting what had already been said. At this point, the conversation had moved far beyond a single comment from 50 Cent aimed at T.I. It was no longer about the words themselves. It was about what people believed those words meant. And that shift changed everything. Suddenly, unrelated names began appearing in the conversation. One of the most noticeable was Lil Che, who started showing up in threads that had nothing directly to do with the original situation. There was no confirmed update involving him, no new development tying him into the story. But that didn't stop people from mentioning him. This is how viral discussions evolve. Once a topic gains enough traction, it begins pulling in surrounding names, ideas, and fragments of unrelated conversations. Some users try to connect dots that don't actually exist, building theories that feel logical in the moment but lack any real foundation. Others simply react to what they see trending, without checking context. T.O. And just like that, another name gets absorbed into the storm. But the most interesting transformation doesn't come from what's being said, it comes from what is. Silence. Neither side steps in to fully clarify the situation. There's no direct confirmation, no denial, no attempt to shut the narrative down. And in the world of viral culture, silence doesn't stay neutral for long. It becomes part of the story. People begin interpreting it as evidence. If it wasn't true, they would have said something. If nothing was going on, why stay quiet? These assumptions spread quickly, even though they don't necessarily reflect how real-life situations work. In reality, silence can mean anything: strategy, disinterest, legal caution, or simply choosing not to engage. But online, nuance rarely survives. Instead, silence becomes a blank space that people fill with their own interpretations. And that's when things get even more chaotic. Old clips begin resurfacing again. Interviews, podcast appearances, past jokes involving both 50 Cent and T.I. start circulating across social media. None of these clips are directly connected to the current situation, but they're edited, cropped, and reposted in ways that make them feel relevant. Captions frame them emotionally, music is added, context is stripped away. What remains is a version of reality designed for maximum reaction. At the same time, T.I. becomes the center of defensive conversations online. His supporters push back strongly against the narratives forming around him. They argue that the entire situation is being exaggerated, that the internet has once again taken a simple joke and turned it into something deeply personal. But here's the problem. The more they defend, the more attention the topic receives. And attention is exactly what keeps the cycle alive. Every response generates more discussion. Every defense invites a counterargument. Every attempt to shut the narrative down ends up feeding it instead. On the other side, critics continue analyzing, questioning, and speculating, convinced that there must be something deeper behind the intensity of the reactions. And then comes a turning point, not in facts but in perception. A wave of commentary posts begins to emerge, suggesting that the situation isn't really about the joke anymore. Instead, it has become a reflection of how modern audiences process information. These posts argue that people are taking fragmented details, clips, comments, rumors, and building full emotional narratives around them. That idea divides the internet once again. Some people agree immediately. They see it as a clear example of how fast, emotional, and often inaccurate online culture has become. To them, this situation is less about 50 Cent or T.I. and more about the behavior of the audience itself. Others reject that idea completely. They insist that such a strong reaction can't come from nothing. In their view, there has to be some underlying truth, something real that hasn't fully surfaced yet. And even without evidence, that belief keeps the speculation alive. Both sides continue arguing. Neither side can prove their version completely. And that's what makes the situation so unstable. Even without posting anything new, 50 Cent remains at the center of attention. At this stage, it's no longer about new statements, it's about old ones. People begin revisiting everything he has ever said, analyzing past comments as if they contain hidden meanings connected to the current moment. Every joke becomes a clue. Every caption becomes a hint. Every past interaction becomes part of a larger theory. And then comes a strange realization phase online. People begin noticing that multiple versions of the story are circulating at the same time, and none of them fully match each other. One group sees the situation as harmless trolling. Another sees it as clear disrespect. Another sees it as an overreaction fueled by algorithms and engagement. All of these interpretations exist simultaneously, and none of them fully take over, because there is no single, universally accepted truth. Once that happens, the story changes completely. It stops being about what actually happened and starts being about what people believe could have happened. And belief, unlike fact, doesn't need proof to survive. That's why the conversation refuses to fade. Even without updates, it keeps looping. Every few hours, it restarts in a slightly different form. One moment, it's jokes and memes. The next, it's serious debate. Then it turns into long explanation threads where people try to connect unrelated past events to make the situation feel bigger than it really is. Each cycle pulls in new participants. Even people who weren't originally involved begin seeing it on their feeds. They react, sometimes with a comment, sometimes with a laugh, sometimes with a quick opinion. And every reaction feeds the algorithm again, pushing the topic back into visibility. Meanwhile, Lil Chase C. continues to be mentioned casually in unrelated threads, not because anything new has happened, but because viral conversations tend to group names together once they enter the same trending space. It doesn't always make logical sense, but emotionally it feels connected. And in fast-moving, online environments, feeling often matters more than accuracy. That's the core issue driving everything: speed over verification. People react instantly. They share instantly. They form opinions instantly. The process of checking facts slows things down, and in viral culture, slowing down means falling behind. So most people don't. Even silence continues to evolve as part of the narrative. Some interpret it as mystery. Others see it as strategy. Some believe it's proof that something bigger is coming. But in reality, silence is just silence. It's the internet that keeps assigning meaning to it. And that meaning changes constantly. One day, the situation feels like harmless trolling. The next, it feels like serious disrespect. Then it shifts into something that looks like industry tension. And eventually, it circles back to feeling like nothing at all, just another overblown moment. All of these versions exist at the same time, competing for attention. That's why even smaller content creators continue covering it. Not because there's anything new to report, but because engagement still exists. As long as people are watching, clicking, and arguing, the topic stays alive. At this stage, T.I. isn't just dealing with a joke anymore. He's part of a larger pattern, one where personal image, public perception, and viral humor collide and get reshaped by audiences in real time. And 50 Cent remains central to that pattern, not because he keeps acting, but because his personality fits perfectly into the mechanics of viral culture. Sharp, unpredictable, and always capable of reigniting attention with just a few words. But then quietly, something begins to change. After all the debates, memes, arguments, and theories, a different kind of reaction starts to appear. Fatigue. People begin saying they're tired of seeing it everywhere. They notice the repetition. They recognize that the conversation is going in circles. There are no new updates, no new confirmations, just the same ideas being recycled in different formats. And that's the first real sign that the cycle is ending. Because viral moments don't end when the truth is revealed. They end when attention moves on. And slowly, that's exactly what starts happening. The focus begins shifting, subtly at first, toward the next trending topic forming somewhere else online. This situation enters its final phase. Not a clear conclusion, just a fade out. At this point, the conversation isn't building toward anything new. It's repeating itself, like a loop that restarts every time someone brings it back up. What began as a single sarcastic moment has now passed through every stage of the internet cycle. Humor, reaction, debate, speculation, overanalysis, and finally, exhaustion. Now it sits at the edge of disappearance, waiting not for resolution, but for replacement. What makes the ending of a viral moment so strange is that it rarely feels like an ending at all. There's no clear conclusion, no final statement, no definitive answer that wraps everything up. Instead, the noise simply begins to fade. That's exactly what's happening here with 50 Cent and T.I. The conversation isn't gone yet, but it's no longer alive in the same way. At one point, every post, every reaction, every comment felt urgent. People were refreshing feeds, jumping into debates, analyzing every angle. Now that urgency is disappearing. The same posts still exist, the same clips still circulate, but the energy behind them has weakened. That's how viral cycles usually end, not with a final answer, but with silence slowly replacing noise. Even the discussions that briefly expanded the situation, like the mentions of Lil Che, are starting to fade into the background. Nothing was ever resolved there. No new information came out. But that doesn't matter anymore because people have simply stopped adding energy to it. The mentions still exist, but they're no longer spreading. They're stuck in older threads, buried in past conversations, occasionally resurfacing but never regaining momentum. And that's the key shift. When a topic stops growing, it doesn't disappear instantly. It shrinks quietly. Visibility decreases. Engagement slows. The conversation becomes less about discovery and more about repetition. Across platforms, the pattern is the same. Fewer new posts, fewer reaction videos. Comment sections that once moved rapidly now update slowly. Long gaps appear between discussions. Instead of fresh interpretations, people are repeating points that have already been made. It starts to feel like an echo, almost like a conversation that already ended, but no one officially acknowledged it. Even discussions around T.I. have split into two distinct groups. One group is still actively debating, still trying to analyze what the original joke meant, still searching for deeper meaning. The other group has mentally moved on. They might see the topic occasionally, but they no longer feel the need to engage with it. They scroll past it. They don't react. And that quiet disengagement is more powerful than any argument. Meanwhile, 50 Cent is still being mentioned, but the tone has changed. Earlier, his name triggered chaos, reactions, and immediate attention. Now, it feels more like a reference point. People bring him up not to continue the situation, but to reflect on it. He becomes an example, a reminder of how quickly the internet can take one comment and turn it into an entire storyline, and then slowly burn through that storyline without ever reaching a clear truth. And that realization is spreading quietly through what's left of the discussion. Nothing was ever fully confirmed. Nothing was ever fully denied. Nothing was ever officially concluded. It was just a moment, one that the internet grabbed, stretched, reshaped, and eventually exhausted itself trying to understand. Now, as attention shifts elsewhere, the situation is entering its final phase. Not an ending, a fade-out. There's almost nothing left adding fuel to the conversation. The story has already gone through every stage the internet knows how to create. Hype, confusion, overanalysis, debate, and finally that slow drop in attention where people stop caring without even realizing it. What remains now isn't new information. It's echoes, old posts still floating around, old clips still being reposted, old arguments still being repeated by people who may not have even been there at the beginning. And that's how you know a viral cycle is finishing. Not when people stop talking completely, but when they stop adding anything new. Even the discussions that once pulled in Lil Che have become background noise. They're still there, technically, but they're not expanding anymore. They're not reaching new audiences. They're just sitting in older threads, slowly losing visibility as newer topics take over. That shift is happening everywhere at once. Comment sections that once felt explosive are now calm. Reaction videos are getting fewer views. Hashtags that once trended are no longer climbing, they're just existing. And people who were deeply involved just days ago are now scrolling past it like it belongs to yesterday's internet. But what makes this moment interesting is what's disappearing. It's what's left behind. Because even as the conversation fades, the pattern it created doesn't go away. People saw how fast a joke could turn into a full narrative. They saw how quickly interpretations could replace facts. They saw how easily silence could be turned into meaning. That awareness doesn't vanish. It gets stored. It becomes part of how people approach the next viral moment, even if they don't consciously realize it. And that's why this doesn't feel like a clean ending. It feels like a lesson the internet learned, but never fully admitted. Meanwhile, 50 Cent remains a symbol of how easily online chaos can begin. His role in the situation becomes less about what he said and more about what his presence represents in digital culture. And T.I. remains tied to the center of a joke that grew into something much larger than it ever needed to be. But even that attention is shrinking now. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just gradually, like a wave pulling back after it has already hit the shore. And in the space it leaves behind, something else is already forming. A new topic, a new clip, a new moment waiting to repeat the same cycle all over again. Because in the end, nothing truly ends on the internet. It gets replaced. At this stage, there's no new twist coming, no hidden reveal waiting to change everything. This is the final wrap-up phase where everything settles into the background. What remains around 50 Cent and T.I. is residual attention, small mentions, recycled clips, occasional commentary posts that briefly bring the topic back before it fades again. Even the earlier buzz involving Lil Che has stopped evolving. No new angles, no fresh interpretations, no rising arguments, just leftover references sitting quietly in older discussions. And that's the final stage of every viral cycle. Not drama, not resolution, disappearance through repetition. The posts still exist, but they don't travel anymore. The comments are still there, but they're not growing. The conversation hasn't technically ended, it has simply stopped spreading. And that distinction matters, because it shows how attention works online, how quickly something can become massive, and how just as quickly it can be left behind when something newer appears. One moment, the internet is fully locked in. The next, it's already halfway somewhere else. And by the time people look back, the situation feels smaller than it did while it was happening. That's exactly where this story is now. A finished cycle, a closed wave, still visible if you go looking for it, but no longer moving forward. As attention continues shifting across platforms, the entire situation slips quietly into the background, not erased, not instantly forgotten, just replaced. Waiting, maybe, to be referenced someday as an example. That moment when the internet took a simple joke and turned it into a full narrative, and then moved on. Even that reference will fade over time, because the internet never stays in one place for long. At this point, there really isn't a next chapter left. This is the true ending phase. What remains is background noise. The viral energy has already peaked. The arguments have been replayed over and over again. The theories have been explored from every angle. There's nothing left to uncover. And that's why people stop engaging. Not because everything has been answered, but because nothing new is left to say. The same jokes lose their impact. The same arguments lose their urgency. The same discussions lose their audience. So instead of a dramatic conclusion, the story simply dissolves. Quietly, gradually, until it no longer feels relevant. And that's the final truth about how these moments work. They don't end with closure. They end with exhaustion. The internet doesn't resolve them. It moves on from them. And right now, that's exactly what's happening. The cycle is complete. In the end, what happens isn't some dramatic conclusion or final reveal. It's something much quieter. The engagement slows down. Reposts become less frequent. Comment sections stop refreshing every second. And slowly, almost without anyone noticing, the topic stops feeling current. It doesn't completely disappear. It just loses momentum. And once that momentum is gone, even the biggest viral storms begin to feel distant, like echoes of something that happened a while ago. That's exactly where this situation now stands between 50 Cent and T.I. It's not unresolved. It's not actively ongoing. It's simply finished in the way internet stories usually finish, by being replaced. Because while this conversation fades somewhere else, something new is already starting. A fresh clip is gaining attention. A new name is beginning to trend. Another viral cycle is forming without waiting for this one to properly close. That's the pattern, over and over again. What feels massive today becomes a memory tomorrow. And eventually, it turns into just another example people point to when talking about how quickly attention moves online. But if you step back for a moment, what just happened here isn't just another piece of celebrity gossip. It's a full demonstration of how fast things can spiral when millions of people react at the same time. A single comment turned into a massive wave of speculation, debate, and interpretation, without ever reaching a clear truth. And that leaves one big question. What do you actually believe happened? Was this just harmless trolling that got blown way out of proportion? Or do moments like this always have something deeper behind them, something the public never fully sees? Because when it comes to figures like 50 Cent and T.I., things rarely stay simple. A joke becomes a debate, a comment becomes a headline, and a small moment can turn into a full-blown online storm in minutes. Now it comes down to perspective. Some people see this as nothing more than entertainment, another example of internet culture amplifying something small. Others believe there's always more beneath the surface, even if it never gets confirmed. Both sides exist, and neither one fully disappears. So where do you stand? Do you see this as just a joke that spiraled out of control? Or do you think there's always a deeper layer behind these viral celebrity moments? Because in the world of fame, music, and influence, the story you see first is rarely the full story. And by the time the truth catches up, if it ever does, the internet has usually already moved on to something else. That's the cycle. And this time, it's already complete.